Welcome to Boston Children's Answers Kids Health. I'm your host, Dr. Jennifer Arnold. As a mom and a doctor, I'm passionate about helping kids stay healthy and happy. So join me as I chat with other Boston Children's experts to find answers for you and your family. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to talk about something I am super passionate about, so let's dive in. But before we do that, let's hear today's parent question.
Hi, I'm Julie. My son is needing surgery, and I can't help but just be nervous and a little scared as a mom. Is there anything that you can tell me to help me feel a bit more confident that his surgery will be successful?
So here to help us talk about this very important topic, one that's near and dear to my heart, is Dr. Peter Weinstock. He is our Executive Director of Immersive Design Systems here at Boston Children's Hospital, my dear friend, colleague, and actually my boss.
Right,
Welcome,
Jen.
Peter.
Thank you. It's just great to be here. Very excited.
Well, I appreciate your joining us today. And, I like to start off all of these conversations with a common question of why you got into the specialty that you're in. But before we do that, I think it would be important for our audience to understand what is healthcare simulation, because not everyone may be familiar with that.
We're going to do this together, I am sure.
Yes.
But probably the best way to think about healthcare simulation or simulation in general is the idea of rehearsal, the idea of practice. And it really is, it is basically practice for healthcare. And we're going to talk, I'm sure, a lot today about how we've been able to expand that idea and make it not just practice for doctors and nurses, but make it available for practice for patients and families. And so you can almost imagine the airline industry and flight simulators. People have seen those, on the screen, almost like games where pilots practice various elements of flying a plane, and sometimes practice when things aren't going so well.
Exactly,
and they
being
have
prepared for the worst case scenario.
Yeah, they have to land a plane in an emergency. So we it's almost 30 years now, 25 years ago, started to adapt that thinking into healthcare and developed this field of medical simulation, which is really practice for better healthcare.
That's really great.
So yeah, that's like one way of thinking about it, I think.
Yeah, it's really just an important tool for us to be at our best.
Yeah.
So I think that's really helpful for our listeners to understand what it is that we do, right? Yeah. I think it's not intuitive to everyone that healthcare institutions, 20 years ago may not have had simulation programs, and just what an important tool it is to helping us to be at our best, to help improve patient care, patient safety. But I'm curious, how did you get into this area so many years ago?
So as you know, I was actually a molecular biologist many, many years ago. In fact, my PhD was in molecular biology. And when I came here to Boston Children's, I had trained in surgery for a little while and so on, but came here, I was ready to open a lab in molecular biology. And talk about being in the right place at the right time. I was a fellow, I was a trainee at the time. And I walk into a room for a training experience, and there sitting in front of me is this robotic child. I mean, it's a mannequin, in front of me. And the monitors are running and things are happening, and I'm basically put into this space to take care of this mannequin. But very quickly, in my mind, felt like I was taking care of a child.
Yeah.
And watching the monitor, I'm with a team, watching the monitor, I'm watching how things are changing, and we're talking about what could be going on. And the mannequin, the child, really isn't doing very well. And after a lot of discussion, we made a decision that probably what was happening for this child in the intensive care unit was that some fluid was accumulating around the heart. And again, all in this environment. And the decision, the way to fix that is you have to put a needle and drain that, as you know, some of that fluid. And so in the simulator, we went ahead and did that. And lo and behold, everything got better.
You saved a life.
I saved the. And here was the key, though. So I'm still a molecular biologist until this moment. About 2 weeks later, it's a true story, about 2 weeks later, I'm in the intensive care unit as a trainee, taking care of all my patients. And I get called into a room. And you know how this ends now. I get called into a room, and there in front of me is a child, a real child. And I'm I'm watching the vital signs, and team's starting to come in, and I'm starting to lead this team, and it becomes very clear to me very quickly what is wrong. And why was it very clear very quick? Because I had seen it before.
Yep.
And I said to the team, this is pericardial effusion is the fancy name for that problem. And I said, we need to fix this. And they said, oh, are you sure? And, there was like a bit of hesitancy, and because it's a big deal.
Yes.
And I said, I'm absolutely sure. And we looked at it, we got a little quick confirmation, and that's what the problem was, and we fixed it.
Just like that.
And I, in that moment, Jen, said, there is something here. And probably around the same time you were having these discoveries, because we've been doing this the same amount of time.
I know.
And I said, there's something here.
Yeah.
There is a new way to think about healthcare. There's a new way to think about how we train and how we provide care to the patients that we care for every day. And I almost that day went into my chief's office and I said, I've got good news and I've got bad news. And I said, which do you want first? He said, I don't know, give me the bad news. I said, the bad news is I'm leaving molecular biology.
Oh.
And he said, and that's what he did. And he said, what's the good news? I said, I think I found my passion. I found my career. It's going to be pediatric medical simulation.
Yeah.
And to his credit, he looked at me, he said, go for it. He said, awesome. I think you're right. And it was him that actually brought Jeff Burns, chief of critical care, had the insight many, many years ago to bring that mannequin into the hospital. And it had such an impression on me. I always say the Jerry Maguire line, it had me at hello.
Yes.
And that's how I got involved. And,
Wow.
and really was very focused from the very beginning on making it a hospital-wide initiative, really creating the opportunity for everyone to benefit from what I saw as a real new paradigm in healthcare. So probably not what you expected, but that's how I got into it.
I love that story because you got involved as the learner first.
I did.
You felt that and you saw the value as, a learner in simulation and then decided, you know what, we need to make this happen everywhere. And I think that's powerful.
If it would have happened any other way, I don't know if it would have been as impactful for a career change.
Yep.
But you really are right. I experienced it firsthand and just felt its power. So all the more reason I'm excited to be here and chat with you. So yeah.
Well, same here.
Yeah.
I think we get each other and the value of what this whole field. I'll share a funny anecdotal story.
Yeah.
When I first was dating my husband, Bill, who you know,
Of course.
and I told him about what I did, and then this was relatively early on in my career of simulation, but I said, this is where I'm focusing a lot of my efforts. And I'm a neonatologist. Yes, I love caring for babies, but I really love caring for robot babies. And he was like, what? And then when I told him what it was, and he said, well, and I said it was relatively new and not widespread. So I'm really hoping, we can help to grow it. And he was like, what do you mean it's not widespread? What do you mean you don't simulate or practice on, mannequins before you practice? I'm like, no, we do the see one, do one, teach one method.
Yeah.
It's an apprenticeship method that, I did my first intubation, my first pericardiocentesis, right? All of those things on real patients. And that's not the best way to do it.
Yeah.
There's a better way.
Totally. Yeah. I remember those moments. Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're at this now as a community in simulation, probably 20 years, 25 years or so. But like anything in healthcare, it's a cultural change.
So along those lines, I'm curious if you could help explain what I think we're both so very passionate about are those different applications of simulation in healthcare, like how we can use the tool, the ways it can be leveraged, the different ways, because they're not all just about education and training. Yeah. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit about those.
I would love to. So for the audience is really to imagine now, let me bring us into a space, okay? So you are walking into a patient's room. All of as I described in my case, all the monitoring is running, all of the room is activated. There is an issue going on. It could be a crisis. It could be just general care for the day. All of that's going on. You're immersed in that. And the only difference is that it's not a real child. The only difference is that it's a mannequin. Now take a picture of that. We have in that moment a moment that is the work that we do every day, but it has been created on demand. That's what a lot of what we love about it, I think, is there's a real theater component. I mean, we have designed the scenario in a way that really creates a certain set of challenges. In the end, it is a moment in time that is the work we do every day. Okay.
It's recreating clinical work.
Work is done, right? So if you do that, it's really wide open, the applications that you can use that moment in time for. Okay, so that's a way to kind of frame this in answering your question. So let's keep ourselves in that moment of time. And now let's look at the trainees, right? So one of the pillars of immersive design systems is training and performance. Training and performance is focused on the healthcare providers in that room being able to train, and that can be medical students. It could be our more graduated trainees. We call them residents or fellows. It could be our senior level staff that are using it for a new approach, a new guideline, a new practice. I mean, these are the best of the best, but we're always learning. We're always innovating. So that training and performance. Experienced clinicians are using it, right? So that is one major pillar to train junior all the way through our most senior staff, okay? Now, lights down, lights back up. They're engaging in this care of this mannequin, but in this setting of this child. What are we also learning in that moment? We're also learning about how humans interact with humans, but also how people interact with their environments and how they interact with the technology. My God, we're surrounded by technology. And we are able, using the simulator, to make observations about how we work in our environments and make that relationship between us and the environments in which we care for our children as good as they can possibly be. And that's the second pillar. So that is what we call our human factors, which is really about learning about how humans interact with their environment, and systems design pillar, our HFSD.
Can I share a story about that one?
I would love that.
I don't know why it just occurred to me, because I'm thinking, if our audience is trying to understand that human factor piece, we do, one of the things we do are system evaluations of construction, building, right? How we lay out a space. And I was just thinking back to one of my examples where we tested a new NICU environment, much like we just opened the Hale building. And this did not happen here, but in another institution, we ran a code after the building was built, but before we brought patients into the building. It's what I would call post-construction system evaluation. And we ran a resuscitation, a baby who was, in an emergency situation. And we noticed that when we ran the same type of scenario 3 days in a row with all the appropriate personnel, they could not get enough access to the baby because of a monitor that had been placed on a boom close to the baby that during walkthroughs in a pre-construction, everyone thought was wonderful. I can document and I can see my patient. It makes so convenient for everyday workflow. But in a crisis, it was unsafe.
Problems are often hidden.
They're hidden.
Until you animate it. Yeah, that's so interesting.
Until you live it and you see it.
Great example.
And they had to remove every boom and every bed space, all 40 beds. So simulation, if we just do it earlier, in that process, we can uncover things before they have an impact on a patient.
That's a great example.
Sorry, just that.
No, it's perfect.
Highlight that.
No, it's exactly what we use it for.
That's why I love this pillar.
And it really gives us a leg up, because for all of what you just described, same ideas are applied throughout the institution. And now, once that patient and this is all before a patient is ever brought into a space, right? So the new building that just went up, same idea. Really kind of animate the plans, take a look, make sure it's all working, almost crash test the environment way before we bring a patient in.
And you all did that in the program here to test that whole building, so that building is safer today, I would imagine, because of all of that amazing work you did.
And we continue to use simulation. You can use it continuously to survey, keep testing those environments. And so the third, which is related, the third pillar goes back to a guy named Gavin Hayes. And Gavin was one of our first engineers. So in simulation, as you know, we have a specialized group that are, another way to think about them is they're our puppeteers. So they are the people who are behind the scenes, who are making all that work. Some of them are making the monitors come to life. Some of them are making the room come to life. And some of them are controlling the mannequin, much like a puppet. And they're incredibly skilled individuals that can do this kind of work. Gavin, many years ago, was working with the commercially available mannequins or simulators.
Yep.
And we needed to do a scenario for otolaryngologists, which are surgeons who do ears, nose, and throat type of surgery. They came to us and they wanted to do a simulation, but here was the problem. We did not have a simulator that would do that kind of, we could recreate what it was they needed. So Gavin, who's an engineer, kind of all of a sudden steps away, and where's Gavin? What's he doing? He grabs some silicone, which is kind of a rubbery, kind of moldable material, and brought it over to the mannequin. And before you know it, there was kind of a puff of smoke in his engineering, magic. And there was this element of the trainer that he had created.
Wow.
And all of a sudden, we were able to do the training that we weren't able before.
Wow.
So now fast forward, we have here a really unique facility, and it's called our Makerspace studio. And it is what Gavin started. It is a facility that contains robotics people, engineers, people who do animatronics. It's like Disney almost.
Oh, absolutely.
And they can create these mannequins and these trainers. So we're not relying anymore on what industry will provide. We can build it here. And the beauty of that is that we have such skilled surgeons, as you know, and such skilled clinicians and such skilled nurses that can inform what exactly do we need as a teaching tool. So we don't have to rely on a company that needs to do that. We can do it. And the beauty of that is that we can also do that not just for ourselves. We are able to help other centers by helping them build what they need to do training locally. So that whole space has really just been fascinating and very unique to what we do. One other thing about it that is really cool. There was this new technology called three-dimensional printing. And I'm sure you heard of it.
I have.
And many in the audience may have heard of it. But three-dimensional printing was just starting to take off. It had been in other industries in manufacturing, but it was just starting to show its face in healthcare, and we jumped on that. Imagine a printer on your desk, but imagine instead of doing it on a piece of paper, that print, now all of a sudden it's multiple pieces of paper that are starting to stack up, layers that allow you to build a three-dimensional object.
Really incredible.
It's super cool.
It's so fun to see in action as
right?
well. By the way, if anyone hasn't seen one, they should go watch a 3D printer in action.
It's really like magic watching it.
Yeah.
But we were able to then partner with radiology, and in particular, Dr. Sanjay Prabhu, who was our director of the three-dimensional printing service, and turn images, CT scans, MRI scans, of a patient into their three-dimensional print. And so now it's the ultimate in simulation, because now surgeons can take what's in an image, turn it into something that they can put in front of them on a table and either design a surgery, practice a surgery, teach a surgery. So that element of this makerspace has just been spectacular.
Well, in particular in pediatrics, where patients typically have such unique complexity, right? From a surgical perspective, to be able to print out their anatomy and have the surgeons, and I've heard you say this, operate twice,
cut once.
But cut once, exactly.
Yeah.
Allows them to be not only more prepared, but sometimes identify complications they would not have known about until they were in the operating room.
Yeah.
And that is a game changer.
And it's been great. I mean, just the surgical groups here have just been so open and enthusiastic, and they themselves are such innovators. How do we leverage that as much as we can, both to make people feel really prepared? But I think what comes along with that a little bit is when people feel prepared, they feel more comfortable and they feel less anxious and in control. We've thought a lot about that and how can we now pivot what we do in simulation and really direct those opportunities towards our patients and families.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. It's my favorite part of simulation. Let's talk about patients and families, since you brought it up, because, that is something near and dear to my heart.
How did you know I wanted to talk about that?
Well, anything that we can do, right, that can help to improve outcomes for our patients is obviously like the heart of everything that we do. Everything has that purpose, that goalpost in mind, that North Star. Yeah. So tell me a little bit from your perspective about how immersive design systems got involved in what I would call patient-centered simulation, right? Simulation as a tool for our patients and their home caregivers.
All right. Well, we're going to tag team this, Jen, because you're world known for this kind of work. The driver for us has been that realization that simulation fundamentally is creating a sense of calm confidence. In the first wave, we saw it in the medical clinicians. In the second wave, we started to see it in the surgical world, and that has just exploded. I mean, imagine that, being able to really energize confidence in high-stakes operating room environments. So we had this experience, and it just drove us to say, who are the people who actually could really benefit from this in a very different way, in a humongous way? And it was clearly the patients and families, so much so that we brought on board Brianna O'Connell, who's just this
amazing,
tremendously talented individual, who is a child life specialist, among other things. She had that insight and know-how how to leverage it optimally. And we use it in all sorts of ways now, preparing patients and families for going home. Why? Because no one walks into a hospital totally calm and confident. Nobody does.
No.
Nobody does. I mean, there's this sense of fear, of anxiety. Madame Curie, the Nobel laureate, says, there's nothing to be feared. It is just to be understood. And that has been a real driver for me. How do we take the unknown, which is the undercurrent of fear, and make it known? For example, if they're going home with new technology, imagine a family who now has survived an illness with their child, and they have to go home with a new feeding tube in their nose, or with a new ventilator,
or a central line.
The old version of that was we would give them all those recommendations, get it all set up, and then send them home. Well, imagine if you can bring them in a simulated environment that feels and looks like the home, and that's what we have over at IDS. And give them a chance to see what the technology will look like, feel it, touch it, run through some scenarios, and figure out and learn in that safe environment with all of their support how to deal with that.
Well, that's exactly why I got into this area of simulation, because we were sending home so many babies with medical complexity, right? And you get these complex babies, and they have technology dependence. And so, again, as I was early on in my career as a neonatologist, and I was scared to send home our babies with tracheostomies and ventilators, knowing that I kept hearing they would bounce back, and then they'd see you in the critical care ICU when they came back to the hospital. But you
felt the anxiety.
But I felt the anxiety.
Because you knew what they were facing.
Exactly. Are they ready? Did they have a chance to practice enough? And we had a great discharge education plan that was at the bedside for them on their child.
Right.
And so if an emergency happened, which we came to realize that up to 80% of our patients could have a life-threatening tracheostomy-related emergency upon discharge after going home. But if an emergency happened if it happened in the hospital, we weren't going to sit back as the doctors and nurses and say, okay, mom and dad, you practice, because in case this happens at home, you have to be able, we're going to manage that.
Yeah.
So it just occurred to me that, parents are the first responders. They are the primary caregivers when we send these, patients home. And so that's where, with my sim hat, I was like, why aren't we doing this for them?
You had asked about, what is simulation? And one of the words I didn't use is experience. And human beings, particularly adults, we know now are predominantly experiential learners. Exactly. It's like you never learn something nearly as well except when you experience it. Someone can tell you, someone can give you some instructions, but in fact, we all know the first thing you do when you get home, when you get a new device or a new computer, or you just open it up, you turn the on button. No one looks at the instructions, right? Because you're going to learn through experience. An adult learners experience it, and that's what's so powerful, I think, about the patient and family work, is that it's speaking to the way I think we all learn best.
Exactly.
And I sometimes talk about it's sort of the animated textbook, right? So these are the animated discharge instructions. Is another way to think about it.
I like that. And here we have such a robust program for our patients and families with simulation that so many of our patients have the access to, depending on what their medical complexity is, to come get that training. And I just hope that every child, every parent has that opportunity to help them be better prepared for going home.
All of this is only possible when you have collaboration. And that's what I love about Boston Children's. That's why I've been here for, I won't say how many years. But no, truly, we have collaborations with the surgical departments. Orthopedic surgery, as you know, has the Sim Discovery program, where children literally come to the Sim Center. It's been totally designed to look like their experience through their operation, but it's not their operation on this round, it's their teddy bear's operation, right?
I love that.
Isn't it amazing? And then they go look up on the screen on the X-ray, and lo and behold, their teddy bear has the same,
Yep.
we say scoliosis. But that's been such a powerful program, and that was only possible because we partnered with orthopedics, and so it's a special place for that.
All for the best interest, the best outcomes for our patients. I want to kind of come back to our discussion about our device and VR solutions pillar,
Sure.
because we really didn't talk about the VR part, which is
the
also,
tsunami
yes.
of virtual reality that we're all experiencing.
It's everywhere, right?
It's unbelievable.
It's growing in the gaming population. It's obviously growing in our general world, right?
Yeah.
VR is here. It's here to stay. It's growing in its application.
Yeah.
But talk to us a little bit about how we're using it in training and simulation.
Yeah, that has been such an interesting journey, and we're just beginning it, Jen, as you know. Here's the thing, we touched on experience and why adult learners, kind of veer towards experience as their way of learning. And my gosh, virtual reality is experience, right? It's surrounding you. So look, the technology is compelling, and it is in some ways a natural fit for human beings and for adult learners. And so we're taking it seriously. We're investing pretty heavily in looking at how do you create or identify the right application for this really cool technology. Yeah. And it's one of those things, we over the years talked a lot about this idea of not getting distracted by all of the technology, right? We've talked about
bells and the whistles.
Already. Yeah. We talked about mannequins and robots and 3D printing, and everyone could hear this and say, oh, that's what simulation is. It's about the technology, and we know it's not. It's about how do you create environments that people want to be in, and they want to learn in. And that's all about how you structure those experiences. And so now it's really about how do we do that? How do we reinvent that for the virtual reality platform and for the virtual reality technology? So a guy named Jeff Jacobson, he and the team with Steve Wilson and that team has built and continue to build what we call our XR service line. So you're probably thinking, why am I saying XR? Weren't we talking about VR?
Yeah.
Well, that's
Explain.
Because, right. So when we talk about the technology, virtual reality, it's almost like putting a TV screen on your face, right?
Can't see anything else.
Can't
other
see
than
anything
that
else.
Virtual
You're excluded.
environment.
That's right. And you can do an enormous amount in that space. It's really like intense, almost gamifying. There's another thing called augmented reality. And augmented reality is also super cool. Augmented reality is you put the goggles on, but it's a little more like you're putting your glasses on because you still see the environment, but what you're able to do is add in additional kind of cartoons in some ways or animations that augment your environment. So for example, there are some furniture companies that are, as you probably know, that are using augmented reality where you can choose to look how a dresser or a bed
I just did this last
you
weekend.
did? Okay.
Yes.
It's a great it's a great.
I can look at the coffee table in my space and say, is it going to fit? How's it going to look? I don't
Super
have to
cool.
guess.
And you might decide just on that, it's just not going to work.
Yeah.
Right? As opposed to the old days where it's like this measuring tape and trying to remember and jotting things down. So we can use that augmented reality. So we've built little applications where they can take a ventilator, for example, or a new device or a new machine, and it's still in the hospital, overlay that on their actual child's bedroom, for example. So that's augmented reality. When you start talking about these different technologies, you need a bucket to place them all in. Yep. And so that's what we call XR, which is all of it. And so we're now developing programs and products that are both for training, but also, and here's the other really cool application that we've been working with, is you can use them also therapeutically. Yep. So imagine a child who is going to, for example, have a CT scan or an MRI scan. And for those who don't know about those are big machines where the child has to be essentially placed inside the machine. And there's a lot of anxiety about that. And sometimes we have to give a little bit of medication by an anesthesiologist to try to calm them so that it's not unnerving for them.
So they can hold still.
They can hold still and be able to get the image.
Yep.
We found that if you use virtual reality, you could basically, and in many cases, have no medication necessary.
Which is incredible.
Incredible. So this is a therapeutic, and there's lots of this that we're exploring.
So again, because as we know, thankfully we have someone like Jeff on our team that can create these experiences, but they're not easy to make, right? There's a lot of complexity just into the technology, but it is getting easier.
Yeah.
And that's allowing us to really expand.
Yeah. And we
how we
hope
apply
to be part of that, making it easier,
Yes,
solution.
I like that.
We really
yes.
like to do that.
Yeah,
So
that way it can be scaled, just
Yeah.
like our other patient family work.
totally. Really cool
Yeah.
stuff.
That's amazing. I could do this all day, and I know we have limited time.
But we
so.
get to do this back at the office.
That's true. Every day, you're right. But I love sharing what we do. So tell me a little bit, just kind of switching gears, what makes our program different than maybe other simulation programs? What's unique about this here?
We're surrounded, I think, to be clear, by a community of people now that do simulation throughout the country and throughout the world. We are very connected to that community. It's just been so enjoyable, actually, to be part of this really amazing group of international innovators around a new way to do medicine.
Yeah.
I will say, no, I think that what we're known for in many ways is how do you bring simulation to the bedside?
Yep.
How do we get it into the hands of the people that are delivering care today and tomorrow? And we developed a program that really does that well. And so, lots of utilizations of simulation for education and for undergraduate education and so on, and all important. Our focus really has been on getting simulation into the hands of people that are delivering care.
That's amazing.
And that's been a real focus, I think, for this program.
Well, I might add that I think there's also one other differentiator here, which is why I was so excited to come join you in this program, is that I think you have just led this with such vision for taking simulation to the next level. Where can we apply it next to have the biggest impact? I admire that about you, and that's I think another differentiator that we have here that you probably would not say yourself, but I would like to point out.
That's very kind
it's
of you.
Important, of course. Yeah. Well, so something else that you are very passionate about, and we were just talking about this, is how we bring it to others. There's a lot of programs that we're partnering with across the globe to help them create simulation programs 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, and above. And so I'm just curious if you could tell us a little bit about how you got involved in international work and how it's going.
We've tried to be innovative and really try to push the field. A lot of that has been also equally about how do we transfer this? How do we spread it? How do we scale it? And it's gotten even more interesting and even easier in some ways because now a community has arisen around this type of effort, trying to get standards and so on. It's one thing to say we can do it at Boston Children's Hospital. It's another thing, and I think in some ways even a more important thing, to be able to say we can help others do this in areas all over the world. And so we got very involved very early on in Europe. Helped programs in Italy and in Spain and in the United Kingdom. And then fast forward a couple of years, and that started to gain traction and started to work in Australasia and in New Zealand and Australia. And more recently now, we're involved in India and Africa. And what's happened as a result of that in some ways is that a lot of those groups and teams, through this network almost, started to get to know each other. Yeah. And slowly but surely, they started to form a bit of a community, a larger community. And as you know, that evolved eventually into a society for pediatric simulation. It's like incredible. And
Yes.
you've been so involved in that. And we have so many friends that are part of that all over the world. So I think that's been both really enjoyable work, but really important work for us. And the best part of that, particularly in the last bunch of years, is that it's no longer us helping, it's learning. Yeah. We're learning from centers all over that are doing amazing work. We bring back, but we just bring back so much from these experiences that change the way we do things. Yeah. So the international, projects are super important, and they also serve a little bit as a validation step. If it works in other places, it means it's a reasonably good method. So that's been really helpful.
Well, and I think too, just the concept of creating those partnerships, it's a win-win for both, as you mentioned, but it's also, the simulation is relatively new. So by having that collaboration, that partnership, learning from each other, we're just, we're rising everybody up, and we're helping to create, the standards for how to do this and how to leverage it as a tool to improve healthcare in every hospital setting.
Yeah.
So
it's really fundamental.
It's great.
And it forces you to get back to what are the rudiments of what you actually do.
Yep.
and it forces you to stop getting distracted by the shiny objects and really get back to it's about rehearsal.
Yeah.
It's about practice, and that can be created in any environment. And then it becomes really about the method to make that happen and less about the bells and whistles. And that's been really important for us because it keeps focusing us on the work and less on the toys.
Exactly. They're just the means to get to the goal.
Totally.
So, okay, so we've talked a lot about simulation, speaking about like, you know, that growth and sort of your interest, or it seems to me your passion always about taking it to the next level. What's on the horizon, do you think? What's next in our field?
Oh, my.
I know. Sorry. That's a tough question.
I think there's two parts to that answer. The quick one is we touched on this already. You know, there's going to be new technologies around creating immersive environments, and we do a lot of work, for example, which may or may not actually include mannequins, but instead include professional actors that are able to recreate the roles, for example, of parents, and we do that in collaboration with our, for example, parent advisory groups, so that they can realistically represent. And then all of a sudden now you have a training opportunity. So it's a great point. It may not involve any digital technology. No. It might involve an actor or another human being. So that's on the side of, you know, changing immersive technologies. The other side that I'm really excited about is what I'll call sort of the adjacent industries that now we can have impact on. And let me explain what I mean by that. Over the years, we've always said simulation is an excuse to debrief, right? We haven't really talked about debriefing very much, but it's a big part of this process. You go in, you're involved in a simulation, a scenario, and that's like 10% of the work, because really what you want to do now is leverage that to understand what we do well and what we can do better. And you have to create an environment where people feel comfortable having those conversations. And in many ways, you're facing your failure in a safe place.
Exactly.
But you're ultimately needing to do that, and that's a skill. You know,
and if you don't talk about the errors, the mistakes, you're not going to learn from it.
You're not going to learn, and you're not going to get the most out of the simulation. And so what ended up happening now as a field is we got really good at orchestrating or facilitating productive conversations and creating environments in where people felt safe to speak up. And there's this whole area, for example, of emotional intelligence and something called psychological safety, which is about feeling the willingness to speak up, feeling like there isn't risk to you if you speak what you're thinking. And you can imagine how important that is in every industry, but certainly in medicine. So now we came in as sort of mannequin specialists, but we're coming out of this into this next 3.0 phase of our careers in our field as really experts in a whole lot of elements that are so important to delivering great care. And I'm really excited about having us keep building that and being a resource. And in some ways, you know, bringing the mannequins when we need them, but being able to also just provide some of these other services around just creating safe environments to talk about how can we provide the best care we can.
Well, it's about improving human behavior. And if you think about the whole purpose of doing simulation, right, is to change behavior. And you mentioned something that reminded me that we haven't really touched upon is, you know, in healthcare, we know that errors happen. And that now, today, I mean, medical errors are one of the top leading causes of death in our country. And what is so valuable, I think, about simulation is that it's an opportunity to study and improve human behavior. We have an opportunity to learn from errors and then prevent them from happening in the real world. And ultimately, whether it's a system issue with our human factors work, or it's a speaking up issue that someone's afraid to speak up in a time of a potential error happening, by practicing these skills, we can actually decrease harm. We can improve patient care outcomes and safety. And, you know, I mean, we've learned this from the airline industry. When a crisis happens, you have to be able to react quickly and you need to be rehearsed. And simulation is really our best tool to making that better.
It's just a great way to put it. I totally agree.
Thank you, Peter.
You're so welcome.
I'm having so much fun chatting with you. And normally I try to wrap up our conversations with what else have we not talked about that we should for our audience to learn about. But I'm fearful that you and I will just continue to talk for another half hour. So I'm thinking for the purposes of time, maybe we'll just move on. But I just want to say thank you so much for taking time out to to chat with us today and share with our audience what is, both of our life passions.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity, Jen. This is super, super fun.
Thank you. Now on to Doctor's Orders, the part of the show where we prescribe an action that parents can use today to help them in raising healthy kids. For today, let's go back to Julie, whose son needs surgery. I hope that every parent thinks about simulation as part of the conversation in the care for their kids. It's an important tool for all of us, not just healthcare clinicians, but for patients and families. And simulation is growing, and it could be a very good fit for you. Thanks for listening to Boston Children's Answers Kids Health. I'd also like to thank our guest parent, Julie, and our guest expert, Dr. Peter Weinstock. Remember to subscribe to our show wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest episodes. Thanks, everyone, and see you soon.